In a metropolitan city like New York, millions of people rely on public transportation to get around on a daily basis. Since the first commuters passed the turnstiles in 1904, the rails and buses have gone through many transformations. The New York Transit Museum takes visitors on a trip back in time to visit New York transportation throughout the decades. And this time capsule is safely preserved where else but underground in a historic 1936 subway station in Brooklyn Heights. I'm Annamaria Chen, and today we're going to visit a time in New York history before the birth of the Metro card, when a subway ride only cost a nickel. All right, I'm here with Marcia Eli. She is the assistant director at the New York Transit Museum. Now, a lot of people may not know that the New York Transit Museum was not initially intended to be permanent. So do you want to tell us a little bit about the history, when and why it was created, and how it became what it is today?
Sure. So we are in a real subway station. The museum is actually in a real subway station, a decommissioned subway station, but a subway station nonetheless. So the station was built in 1936, and finally in 1946, because of the redundancy and the fact that it was just a 3-block shuttle and it was clear that the rest of the line wasn't going to be built, they closed this station. It remained that way until 1976, which was the bicentennial year. And in honor of the bicentennial, cities and organizations across the country were celebrating their various accomplishments. And a bunch of New York City transit workers got the bright idea to celebrate the accomplishment of the New York City subway system, which was an engineering feat, and opened up this mothballed station in 1976 on the 4th of July for what was to be a temporary exhibit that was just going to run through Labor Day. Well, that exhibit never closed.
And what goes into curating the different buses and trains and artifacts that are here in the museum? I mean, were these trains just sort of sitting around for years and years and years and someone had kept them in good condition?
We really owe their existence to transit workers who had the foresight and the vision to recognize that once a particular car was taken out of service, that someone should save examples of that car. They shouldn't just be wrecked and trashed and recycled. So thanks to transit workers, really, who squirreled away, cars hidden in yards on tracks. I mean, it's hard to hide a subway car.
Right.
But they would squirrel them away and put them over the side and keep them and loved them and truly loved them. We now are able to show this incredible collection of vintage subway cars and elevated cars.
So you mentioned that some of the exhibits are rotating and some are permanent. Which exhibits can people always expect to find here? And do you want to highlight maybe some of your favorites that have gone through the museum?
The thing that will never leave this museum are the vintage cars. When you come down here to the platform level where you would normally catch your train, you open yourself up, you get a peek into 100 years of history. This one that we're sitting in now is from 1904.
Wow.
This car that we're sitting in now is made of wood. And it has a floor that's poured concrete, and it ran as an elevated line throughout New York City. Back then, in 1904, there was no air conditioning. There weren't even any fans in this car. So in the summer, they would literally take these windows out. And so you'd get the air coming through as it rode along the elevated lines, which were about 50 feet above ground.
And I noticed there's a lot of the advertisements at the top. Are those all authentic?
Those are from that era, yes. They aren't
the original one, but they're
the original ones. They're reproductions, but they're all from that era. You can see also in this car the canvas straps that people would hang on to, and those are actually how we get the term strap hanger, which is what New York City subway riders are called. This was actually a money car.
wow.
This car, as you can see, because of the bars on the windows and the workstations inside, was a secret car that traveled at night going from station to station, collecting the revenue, the cash.
If I had to guess from the outside, I was gonna assume this was a jail car,
Yeah.
but it's not. So this is kind of like the movie Money Train.
Exactly. And this was a car that was considered more luxurious. And even today, if you live in New York, you will know that some subway cars are narrower and some subway cars are wider. And that's because of the competition between the two original subway lines, the IRT and the BMT.
Competition is always good for the people, right? You get nicer cars. I'd like to point out also that they have this large fan here on the ceiling, and I would imagine if you were pretty tall that it could be a little bit dangerous.
Well, that's true. People yawning, might reach up there and get their hand caught in there. But I think at that point in time, it was also considered just a wonderful, luxurious thing to have a fan, some breeze in these cars. So now we're at the car that's affectionately known as the Bluebird. And people who grew up in New York will remember the Redbirds, which originally were the Bluebirds. They went through many color schemes, and ultimately they were painted red, and the Redbirds were something that people were very familiar with in the 70s and 80s and even 90s. And the Redbirds became famous even after they retired because they are part of a reefing program. These cars, what do you do with these hulks of metal? Well, they literally have taken them offshore and sunk them to the bottom of the ocean to create new reefs for the fish in areas where reefs are being destroyed. So there's, 2,000 or so of these cars at the bottom of our ocean. So here's a car that shows some of the great innovations of the day. In 1949, this is one of 10 prototypes. Each one cost $100,000, and the 10 made this line called the $1 million car. The thing never ran, really.
So these cars now have actual air conditioning, right?
Yes.
We're no more fans, no more dangerous metal fans on the ceiling. We have actual air conditioning here.
I think one of the neat things I should say about the museum that makes it kind of special, different than a lot of other places, is that you can come on these cars.
Yeah.
You can come and you can sit down. There's no rope here. There's no stanchion that says no entering, just looking. You come, you sit, you feel, you imagine what it was like back then.
Each one really does have a different vibe. It's kind of like stepping into a different time period. Every one that we've walked into feels completely different.
Upstairs, our steel, stone, and backbone exhibit tells a really dramatic story about building that first subway line, underground subway line. That exhibit's won awards. People love it. It creates an environment. Even when you enter the exhibit, sort of makes you feel like you're kind of in a tunnel. And then we have what we call On the Streets. That's the name of the exhibit. That's about surface transportation. There, kids can sit in buses and be the bus driver. They love that. There's a timeline that traces sort of the evolution of surface transportation. And then we have all sorts of exhibits that relate, because the number of topics is just endless that relates to transportation and transit in New York City. Right now we have an exhibit about electricity. It's a science exhibit. Families love it. It's about how electricity powers our subways and railroads. And currently we have a wonderful exhibit about a beauty contest that ran in subways for decades, from the 1940s to the 1970s, called Miss Subway, which is wonderful. It's car cards of these old beauty queens, and then pictures of them currently, and tells a little bit about what happened in their lives. When you come to the museum, this is the first thing that you see, is this wonderful spread of turnstiles. Starting here with the original ticket chopper, way back in the early 1900s, where a man stood there and chopped each ticket individually, and ultimately that just didn't work. So they began to create this turnstile system, and then over the years it evolved and evolved and evolved. And some people sort of get a quick flush of nostalgia. I remember those turnstiles, I remember those cars. Other folks are just, wow, this is the coolest environment I've ever been in terms of a museum. There's something for every age, every generation here. Hipsters love it because it's so quintessentially New York. Folks who grew up in New York who are older love it because it brings back memories.
And obviously the kids love it. There's how many kids that just have been running up and down the turnstiles as we've been standing here. So even if you don't want to learn about the history or read about it, and you just want to run through cool turnstiles and run through old trains, I mean, you'll have a field day here. All right, you may not be able to ride the subway for only 5 cents, but you can visit the New York Transit Museum for less than $10. Come check them out. They're on the corner of Boren Place and Skemmerhorn Street. See you next time.